Part 6. The Purpose Behind the Silence. You've heard what happened to the sleepless. You've seen the consequences of being awake in a world that was never meant to be observed during those hours. But now, we shift to something far more unsettling. Why did the event happen at all? No action of that scale, no global shutdown of consciousness happens without purpose. Creatures like the ones Jonas saw do not cross into our world out of curiosity. Entities capable of touching the mind of every human simultaneously do not act without intent. After months of collecting data, stolen recordings, and testimonies from places that resisted the sleep wave, something began to emerge, something terrible in its clarity. The hum, the symbols, the reconfigurations, the transformations, the mapping. All of it pointed to a single conclusion. The 3 nights were not an attack. They were not an accident. They were not a test. They were phase 1 of an integration process. Now let me explain what that truly means. The humming language. The hum recorded in the submarine, the Antarctic station, and the Finnish bunker was not random. It wasn't atmospheric pressure or seismic resonance or machinery vibrations. When I isolated the frequencies, I found something horrifying. The hum carried information density far beyond human speech, layered harmonics, mathematical sequences, deep, throbbing pulses at intervals corresponding to neural oscillations in the human brain during REM suppression. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a command, a mass, global synchronization signal. It aligned billions of human minds into the same receptive frequency, the same vulnerable pattern of unconsciousness. A perfect moment of silence for something to operate. Now, remember the symbols printed in Bunker Silo 9? The ones that burned the thermal paper? The ones that resembled runes? When I compared the patterns from the bunker with the hum's waveform, they aligned. The symbols were a visual representation of the same command language. And that language wasn't aimed at machines, it was aimed at us. Neurological mapping. Every EEG from the 3 nights showed the same state, triptych synchrony, a term that appears in the leaked division documents. It refers to a condition where the mind stops producing distinct dream states. Neural pathways stabilize. The conscious self steps aside. The subconscious becomes accessible. The mind becomes writable. The division had been tracking micro-events of triptych synchrony for decades. Every time the anomalies preceded unusual behavior, hallucinations, or disappearances. The 3 nights were simply the first time it happened to everyone simultaneously. Every brain on Earth, open, accessible, vulnerable. And something reached in. The global calibration. Using all the suppressed medical data, I found that certain markers, electrical patterns in the brain, were uniformly altered during the event. Just a tiny shift, barely measurable, but consistent in billions of people, like someone had adjusted the baseline settings of the human mind. A recalibration. The division called it Phase 1 alignment. But if alignment was Phase 1, what was Phase 2? The symbol in the sky. You remember the symbol Jonas described seeing above the valley? He thought it was a hallucination, burned into the air like a mirage. But it wasn't unique. Satellite archives, ones that were never meant to be public, showed faint atmospheric distortions in similar shapes above Johannesburg, Marseille, Kyoto, Toronto, and the outskirts of Oslo. The same symbol, the same geometry, the same impossible angles. It is a sigil, not decorative, not ritualistic, a coordinate map, a map of consciousness, human consciousness. And that symbol also appears carved on ancient stones in Babylonia, scratched onto bones found in Siberia, and painted in abandoned temples in rural Peru. Cultures that never had contact with each other. This has happened before, just never at this scale. The sleepless as control subjects. Why did the ones who stayed awake transform? Why were their shadows wrong, their reflections delayed, their emotions eroded? Because they broke the pattern. They were outliers, anomalies, human systems that resisted the calibration. Imagine adjusting the frequency of 1 billion tuning forks, and a few dozen vibrate differently. The system corrects those forks, or removes them. The sleepless weren't cursed. They simply didn't fit the new configuration. The whispered message. Now we come to Jonas's final recording, the one he sent me before vanishing. A clean version of the hum, higher fidelity, closer to the source. When I removed the harmonics and isolated the lowest frequency band, the waveform became unmistakably intentional. It wasn't noise, it was a voice, not human, not mimicking human speech, but shaping sound in a way that carried meaning. It repeated the same phrase, phase 2 begins. But there was more. Hidden in the upper harmonic, almost inaudible, was a second, shorter message. Not a phrase, a set of numbers, coordinates. Not symbolic coordinates, not metaphorical, literal geographic coordinates. I double-checked them, triple-checked. The coordinates point to a location tied to the one grandfather has been speaking to in this story. The in-world listener, not the real viewer. The person he has been guiding through this narrative. A location woven into the events long before the 3 nights. A location connected to the next step in the integration process. Jonas realized it before I did, which is why he vanished, why the division took him, or why the entities themselves might have. And now, child, you understand the truth the governments have been too afraid to accept. The 3 nights were not the end. They were the beginning. A calibration, a mapping, a quiet opening of the human mind. Phase 2 is contact. Before we continue, let me ask you something, not out of fear, but out of necessity. If the first phase required silence from the world, what do you think the second phase will require from us when the silence returns? Stay close. In Part 7, we face the second sleep and the truth that has been waiting since the first.